because of certain statements made, I would say, by the Democrats, by specifically our vice president, all of a sudden, Virginia became a big deal.
Because you see, what happens in Virginia will in large part determine what happens in 2022, 2024, and on.
If that's the case, we're going to have an interesting couple of years.
It should mean that the Biden agenda, specifically the reconciliation bill, is dead in Washington, D.C. Clearly, voters don't like that agenda. I'm not sure that's what it's going to mean short term, Logan, but that's what it should mean.
Full meltdown on CNN. I loved watching it. It was a blast. I mean, there was one point where they just showed the map and there was like almost an explicit moment of Jake Tapper just being like in shock.
When it was so close, like you were saying, you were seeing these personalities and anchors on CNN and MSNBC and all these other networks start to get nervous and what's going to happen here.
They want you to believe that this is a direct representation of what they think of the negative of President Trump. But they're going to say it in a way that even those on the left should be kind of disgusted. So this is Van Jones last night as the election started to turn.
Have we seen the emergence of the Delta variant of Trumpism? The Delta variant of Trumpism. In other words, Youngkin, same disease, but spreads a lot faster and can get a lot more places.
To compare your political opponents to something that has killed 5 million people globally, it reminds me of when the Democrats labeled people in MAGA caravans as ISIS, like their caravan, our caravan kind of thing. Or when back in Florida, there was that candidate Daniel Webster that got labeled Taliban Dan. The left seems to go to the worst possible level to categorize their opponents as evil, as terrorists, as a plague.
I think we need to live in a world where this is not the way it's treated, and we need to get back to where there's some semblance of reality. And I believe that is what, and Dan, you could speak to this, the Virginia voters essentially said.
It wasn't politician-centric, it was voter-centric. And Glenn Youngkin saw that voters in his district were incredibly concerned about the education of their children, and he spoke directly to that message. Logan, I think if both parties would start doing more of that, we'd have a healthier system.
Many Democrats have gone ballistic claiming that Republicans are the true racists. And yet it is a Republican who is replacing the current governor of Virginia, who has been caught in blackface and a KKK uniform. It's a Republican woman who has become the first Jamaican African-American lieutenant governor in Virginia history. We have also an attorney general who has been elected, who is a Cuban American. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, you should look at the Republican administration going forward because it is highly representative, even if we look at racial terms, of the populace of the state of Virginia, contrary to what the Democrats are saying.
This should be a clear message for Democrats as they're getting ready for 2022 that maybe we don't need to be so heavily tied to all this social spending. But that message isn't necessarily getting across to all the Democrats that are in Congress. We hear that Nancy Pelosi has already said this won't affect their agenda. But Senator Dick Durbin tried to use it in a very cleverly spun way that the loss of Terry McAuliffe should mean that they need to double down to get the work done.
Terry McAuliffe has been saying for weeks that his fate was tied to the progress of negotiations here on Capitol Hill, and there ought to be a clear message to my party and all those who support it to get the job done.
Only in D.C. could you have a result like last night and get a reaction like you got from Speaker Pelosi and Dick Durbin that, maybe we need to double down even harder on the agenda that voters in a blue state and in a purple state rejected very conclusively last night.
While Durbin is saying if we'd gotten the negotiations forward, maybe there would have been a victory, President Biden saying the opposite.
I don't believe, and I've not seen any evidence that whether or not I am doing well or poorly, whether or not I've got my agenda passed or not, is going to have any real impact on winning or losing. Even if we had passed my agenda, I wouldn't claim we won because Biden's agenda passed.
Look, in my lifetime, this is what happens. This is, Will, we talked about this earlier. This is kind of how it's supposed to work.
The system's working pretty well when you have a sweeping change in 2020 and then you see an agenda start going forward. And while all the media wanted people to believe that no Republican could ever win in the United States of America again, you start to see these close races. Why? Because the agenda that's being put forward, one, isn't fully what was necessarily sold to the public during the campaign, and two, it's not working out the way they expected it. So what does the American people do? They go vote, as they have the right to do, and they vote for change.
If you're interested in politics, hopefully this is fun. These are the nights that are interesting to watch the news because you don't think about Virginia as being something that the world should care about. But you know who made them care about it? Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, President Obama, who all made the pilgrimage to Virginia to try to, that should have been the first sign that this wasn't going to go the way they wanted to go. Because you don't roll out those heavy hitters and then, President Trump doesn't tell a town hall.
If you look at Western Virginia, you look at Southwestern Virginia, the typical Trump voter, even one who would call themselves, MAGA world, they all came out heavily for Glenn Youngkin. But so did the suburban soccer mom, so to speak, who voted for Joe Biden last time. Logan, look, in places like Virginia, that's the only way a Republican wins election is if they build a coalition. And like we talked about earlier, if they talk about real issues facing real people and put real solutions forward.
Historic Virginia elections, not only seeing the governor's race go to a Republican after a strong showing and a clear-cut victory by Joe Biden just a year ago. I mean, I know it's been a long year, everyone, but that was just a year ago. And then we're 1 year away now. So think about it. We're halfway through to the midterm elections.